Okay, hi guys, welcome to the show and a return of Gentry in a jiffy. In this episode, I thought I would share 7 interesting facts that perhaps you didn't know about the most iconic watch of all time. It's a watch I will always have in my possession, whether it be the modern ceramic and souped up super case that I started the channel with, or my current vintage Tudor version, which is naturally today's wristwatch check. The Submariner, no matter what form it comes in, is always the cornerstone of my personal watch collection. Before we get into it, make sure you like this video and hit the bell icon to ensure that you do not miss out on any future episodes. So with that said, let's get into it. When it was originally released in 1953, it's easy to think it was the first Rolex to have a rotating timing bezel. This is a common misconception. The first Rolex with a rotating bezel was actually from decades previous, with the xerograph prototype in the 1930s. The second was the turnograph, also from 1953, which was a watch positioned as a device to offer an easier way to measure and record time. Unbeknownst to many, the inaugural turnograph, reference 6202, was actually the first serially produced Rolex wristwatch to feature a rotating bezel. Marked from 0 to 60, it is easy to turn by hand to time an operation in conjunction with the minute or hour hand of the watch. Therefore, at any moment, you have an immediate record of elapsed time. It's important to note here that the turnograph came before the Explorer, Submariner and GMT Master, so therefore the turnograph has the distinction of truly being Rolex's very first tool watch. The first turnograph shared many design traits that the Submariner would follow with only a few months later, such as the rotating bezel, a black time-only dial featuring round, rectangular and triangle indices, along with a stainless steel bracelet and steel case. The very first Submariners didn't always have the name on the dial. The initial references was either the 6204 or 6205. It is unclear which model actually came first. In any event, the two watches were nearly identical. It is believed there were unexpected trademark issues connected with the Submariner name. So some watches of the 6204 have the Submariner logo printed below the center pinion, and some are completely blacked out. However, trademark irregularities notwithstanding, both the 6204 and 6205 are designated Submariner models in the Rolex product literature and advertising. The Submariner didn't always have Mercedes hands. The 6200 from 1954 was in fact the first timepiece in the Submariner range that would carry the now quintessentially Rolex associated Mercedes hand set. It's hard to imagine that such distinctive design traits, now so synonymous with the brand, was not there from the very beginning. The 6200 was produced in very small numbers, and within a few years Rolex revised its Submariner line, producing the 6536 with the small crown and the 6538 with the oversized crown. These watches had the improved caliber 1030 movements, including a chronometer version in some 6536 models. The now familiar Mercedes hands finally became standard across the entire range. The Submariner logo and depth rating printed on the dial were now a permanent feature, setting in stone the instantly recognizable design language that would endure to this very day. The Rolex Sub originally had a bezel that rotated in both directions. The Submariner I owned was the contemporary 116610LN and therefore had a ratcheted 120 click unidirectional bezel. I had wrongly assumed that the Sub always had a bezel that functioned in this manner. It was not until more recently, when I acquired an early 90s Tudor 79090, that I realized that Rolex and its smaller brother brand had not improved upon their bidirectional bezels for a long time. Rolex began including unidirectional bezels with the Submariner date reference 16800N introduced around 1979. Then, the no-date model received a unidirectional bezel with the introduction of the Submariner 14060 in 1990. With Tudor, it was not until 1995, with the last great generations of Tudor subs, that superseded mine. These were the references 79190. Another common misconception, while we are on the subject, is that Rolex first introduced the rotating bezel in a dive watch in the first place. It was in fact the launch of the Blancpain 50 Fathoms in 1953, which was the first diver with a unidirectional bezel that can only rotate clockwise, and is arguably the first true dive watch. This was specifically designed with a diver in mind and developed in collaboration with a team of French elite divers called Frogmen. While the bidirectional rotating bezels may be quicker for wearers to turn to the desired amount, for divers, if the bezel gets accidentally knocked, this could cause miscalculations in how long they have been underwater. Therefore, unidirectional bezels are a more prudent choice, and accidental knocks to the bezel can only result in an overestimation of immersion time. The main reason for this delay in Rolex adopting the unidirectional style bezels was simple. Blancpain had first owned the patent since 1952. The 1680 Red Sub was the first Submariner to offer the date function. The 1960s was a crucial period of change for the Submariner in defining its key design traits. Gilt printing had turned to white, crown guards of various styles were added, Rolex discontinued the use of radium paint for the luminous indices, switching to a safer tritium-infused paint, and it also finally became available with a date complication. This was a momentous shift as it signified the end of it being merely a specialist tool watch and its transformation into a mass-market luxury commodity it has now become. While many professional and military divers continued to use Submariners in the most demanding underwater environments, by the late 1960s the watch had undeniably become a mass-market product as well. It is believed that Rolex decided to commemorate this occasion, with the earliest versions of the reference 1680 having the Submariner label written in red, hence the nickname Red Submariner. The brand eventually phased out the red writing and replaced it with white printing in 1973, and as a result, these models are highly sought after and prized by collectors. Rolex worked with the British Ministry of Defence directly to create the Mil Sub. As we have discussed in a video recently, Panerai were first to produce watches issued to the military divers in World War II, and Tudor in the 1960s and 70s produced the highest quantity of military divers to supply the US Navy, the French Marine Nationale, and several other organizations throughout the world. While the French Navy had turned to Blancpain in the 1950s, the British Royal Navy chose Rolex with the early 6538 subs to equip their underwater forces. This is certainly something that added to the veracity and allure of the James Bond sub when Sean Connery wore the 6538 Submariner in the early 007 movies. Even if Ian Fleming wore a Rolex Explorer 1016, Sean's subs were just as much of a compelling and believable choice for Navy Commander James Bond. But the British military were also working with Omega, a relationship like that of Rolex which had been forged in World War II. Omega had overtaken the Rolex 6538 by the early 1960s and was supplying the Royal Navy divers with the Seamaster 300. This is where the Rolex 5513 and 5517 comes into the story. The Brits liked some of the features of the Omega so much, they specified them to Rolex when developing the Mil Sub. The result is one of the most lusted after and instantly recognizable military watches of all time, with only 1,500 ever being issued, of which it is estimated that only 180 or so still exist today. All examples were to leave the factory with the following MOD specs: fixed bars, the tritium T on the dial, sword hands, and a 60-minute bezel which had the hash marks for each of the 60 minutes and not just the first 15 minutes you see on your average dive watch. These reach a staggering $100,000 and beyond at auction today. Did you know there was once a Submariner made with an automatic helium escape valve? Typically, it is a feature you only see on the Sea Dweller, the bigger brother diver made for ultra-deep diving, as opposed to the Sub, which is more primarily for amateur and recreational diving. These custom-made watches for Comex, which is a company known for its technology in regard to underwater exploration at great depths and pioneering work in very deep saturation diving. The Submariner chosen by Comex was the reference 5514 and was never actually sold in stores by Rolex. In fact, it's believed that only 154 examples of this special Submariner were delivered to Comex, making them some of the rarest subs ever made. For those who don't know, at depths greater than 250 feet, the gases in the water becomes toxic. When divers go on expeditions at these great depths, they have to travel down in a diving bell. These are highly saturated with helium and hydrogen to counteract the toxic air found at these depths. Because helium atoms are extremely small, they can easily slip inside the watch case. This becomes a problem when the diving bell makes its ascent to the surface. As the bell depressurizes, so does the watch. Therefore, the buildup of helium inside the watch could damage it, and the resulting pressure can pop the crystal off the case. But this definitely has to be one of the most forgotten about legacies of the Submariner story. So there we have it. Please do like this video if you enjoy it, and nominate the next iconic watch you'd like to see in this little mini-series. Who knows, I might continue it. There's always so much to learn, even about the watches that we know all too well. So thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.